Hello there, this is Dr. Samurai, a professor in Japan specializing in international social pathology. Okay? And this is my qualification. The topic of today's my minute lecture is Mr. Cody Scott. As usual, from general to private information. Okay, so let's start with today's thug profile number 34. Mr. Cody Scott was born in Los Angeles in 1963. At the age of 12, he jumped in his gang clique, 8 Trey Crips. He is also called Monster by nickname by his friends. The reason is at the age of 13, when he was trying to extort money from a guy, he stomped his face so hard, so his face kind of got deformed, disfigured. So the other members watching that scene called him is a monster. Okay, so let's look into some details. Just now I said he jumped in to 8 tray, right? 8 tray means 83. So I think his neighborhood was close to 83rd Avenue in Los Angeles. And I also mean jump in is kind of an official entry test to become full gang member. It depends on which area you live, but you will be beaten up for a certain period of time, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Depending on the area, you can fight back or you cannot fight back. In case of a female, to be a full member, they get raped by all the other members and stuff. But at the age of 12, he jumped in, right? Became a full member. His childhood was not happy one. Cody was born between his mother and a guy other than his father. So his father hated Cody, and he showed it clearly to him. So there are many times that only he was left home while all the other kids were taken out to somewhere to play. He was also physically abused and mentally abused by his father. Cody's mother decided to move to South Central because the rent was cheap in that area where, so many gangs everywhere. He was extorted for the first time by 2 older kids. It must have been some kind of initiation to know where he is living at now. But there was no mother at home walking out. His father didn't like him. He couldn't do anything about that extortion. And the time he spends on the street, becoming longer and longer. At the time, the founder of Crips, Mr. Tukey Williams, was still out. Cody was living very close to Tukey's house. And at the yard of Tukey's house, many gang members gathered and smoking PCP and pumping up irons to put on some muscles on their bodies. Have you ever seen the scene that in prison they lift up some irons, and after they put it down, they smoke cigarettes and stuff? I think instead of cigarettes, they were smoking PCP. Since he didn't have anything to do and he has no friends, he naturally, spend time at Tuki's yard too, and Tuki shared PCP with Cody too, which he later wrote in his biography that regretted to share such a drug with such a small kid at the time. But anyway, at Tuki's yard, he heard many episodes and stories about how a guy beat the other guy, and how the drive-by went on, and all those story the guy who was there wanted to boast it about. Okay, and listening to those stories as a little boy, he started to dream about becoming gangsters too. Let me start into some personal stories. By the way, it all depends on which clique you are in. Depending on the clique, they have a lot of tattoos like up to their neck, and depending on the clique, to put on muscle is the norm, and it all depends on where you live and which clique you belong to. Two keys, clique to put on heavy muscle was kind of a way to go. So even Cody, after he got older, got a lot of muscles on his body, like a bear or a gorilla or something. It was a risky situation when I contacted Cody, but he plead guilty to what the prosecuting side offered to avoid 3 strikes, which automatically means life sentence. So he accepted 6 years at the Pelican Bay, solitary confinement. And the time I contacted him was the latter half of his 6 years. Although because of the book he published, the title was Monster, he was called Monster. The name came from that stomping. But at the time I started to contact him, he already converted himself to Islam, and he called himself Sanika Shakar, and that was the name he put in the letters to me. He was very sincere person, and what we talked about was mainly on spiritual thing, how the society should be, and things like that. He was very serious about it. He started out like that in his letter. In America, those who become gang members are the same as those who become child soldiers. In a third country, very poor, little kids like 80-year-old boy is holding a gun and just counted as a full soldier. He said to become gang is the same thing. He continued like America might look very rich country to the outside world, but ghettos where we live is a totally different story. Drugs, unemployment, diseases, high school dropouts, and guns. So he says ghetto is not part of America, you know. It's like the third country neglected by the whole American society. And those third world ghetto are scattered around all over the United States. That's where gang survived, he said. But, you know, because he was very honest person, he said, when I wrote and published my autobiography, Monster, in 1993, my understanding about society wasn't that deep. So I only recorded what happened in my life, in my everyday life only. So that means later on, after he published his first book, he experienced prisons and things, and there was time to think about his life, and that deepened his understanding about the society, I think. And he goes, why did I become gangster? The answer is very simple, one word: fear. You know, when you grow older, you forget about it. But when you were a little kid, most of what you feel is occupied by fear, isn't it? And I think he was making a good point. That's true. When you were little, you were scared all the time because no experience about society. Parents were always fighting. I was bullied up until I hit like sixth grade. I thought that once I become gang member, I can get weapons to protect myself. And also, all those TV programs and Western movies and stuff, they indirectly affirm the use of violence. He said, all that I now understand the government is doing intentionally to promote recruit to the military. But there's no doubt that those movies and TV programs justifying violence are promoting the use of violence. Very sharp. And it is still happening everywhere in the United States, right? That's the myth US is following. And although I have a family, he said that, it's like I didn't have a family. And the gang had the rules that we have to obey, and loves that was missing in my family life. My family was collapsed family, dysfunctional family. But all those things that I missed in my real family, the second gang family provided instead. Do you understand what he means? It's not just a fashion, Families are not functioning how it should function. So the gangs were the family, real families, who provided regulations, rules, and love, and all that little kids wanted but couldn't get at the real family. And listen to this. Those guys whose biological home is so terrible that is willing to do anything to protect this second family. Those are the ones who become real gangsters, who go all the way. So there is no place to go back to. They go all the way to protect that family. That's the real thing. And the mechanism why they are willing to gangbangs. And he continues like, of course, what I said just now is not a conscious thing, unconscious thing when we were young. But all those third world ghettos that I said scattered over the United States, there are myths that sees gangs as heroes, and that local myth is so deep into the ghetto culture. Toughest, most violent person becomes a hero in the ghetto. Very persuasive story. He says, what I'm saying is actually what he told me in his letter. My family was terrible. He knows I am not his son. My biological father was blatantly cold to me. Parents were always physically fighting. That doesn't mean father always won. But as soon as that parents started fighting, I rushed out of the home and like a real little kid jumped on the fence and doing kids like play. I later learned by reading some book by some scholar that those kids who do not have opportunities to talk to adult people, their psychological development does not progress and stop at a certain level. That's what he said. He also said those guys who were abused at home and bullied by older kids, they will not fight, face to face. Rather, they start to use dirty tricks to beat the other guy. But I am going to stop my letter around here this time. Department of Homeland Security is always checking the letters that comes in and out of prisons. So, although I have a lot more I'd like to talk about, I think I should stop doing that. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Oh, and also when you copy and paste some pictures on your letter talking about my message, okay? Lately, I'm getting older and I cannot see small things. So, would you make it a little bit bigger? Monster Cody was a person like that. I think, although he said he missed opportunities to talk to adult people, actually, he was surrounded by Tukey Williams and all the other adult gang members, OGs. So he was very smart. Of course, his first-time experiences helped his intelligence as well, but he was very intelligent. I think I communicated with him less than a year, or about a year. I don't remember. But since he was a model prisoner, he wanted to be out so badly. This is my intuition. But black people are kind of weak at being confined to small cells or prisons, and those conditions that they cannot move freely more than other like Mexican people, Asian people, and all the other races. I think this is a racial thing. Black people are made to be active, so to speak. So I think this 5 years was too long for him to waste. I read it in some book. It said that there was some time that Cody and Colton, they are both Crips, right? Cody and Colton were intentionally placed together at confined yard to fight. I hear this happens all the time, especially at the Los Angeles jail. And CEOs are betting on which side wins and stuff like that. And I hear it, from many other sources. So I think this is a fact. Although they belong to the same Crips, but nowadays the wars are between the smaller cliques of larger same family. Do you understand? Like within Bloods or within Crips and stuff like that. So that's that. It's interesting. I mean, not in a good meaning, but there was one letter came to me after he was released from Pelican Bay. And that letter said, I was in a room where I couldn't even be under sunshine for 5 years because it was isolation. That means 23 years inside and just 1 hour in a confined high wall yard. It's called a yard, but it's just a space. And higher up, you can see sky, but only through grades. So it's not a real yard. But that was the only thing he could experience, and he couldn't see the sun either because the wall was so high on all sides. So he said 5 years after no sun, now I started to get my black skin color back. And he also wrote that he is scared every day to see so many people and cars and all that because he was alone all the time in an isolation cell. So he said, it was very scary. That's what he wrote. I'm not sure whether Cody watches this or not, but I wrote back to the address that he put on the envelope, but it was returned. The famous RTS, returned to the sender, saying that there's no such address. And I checked it in Google Map with the real photographs and stuff. That address was right in the middle of intersection. And I smiled. That's the well-worn device that young people use. Once out of prison, cut the relationship, with everybody and start moving on, in the new outside world. But all the memories I have and the correspondences with Mr. Monster Cody were positive and very instructive and informative to me. So I really, really appreciate. And just remember, I even put the Japanese cookies in my when I send my message back to the fake address. I hope somebody forward this message to Mr. Cody. But I am hoping that he is being happy somewhere in the United States. Not to get caught again. Cause no next time. Cause he's gonna hit the 3 strike if he is in California. So that's that. I hope I gave you something interesting to think over. And up until next time, please have a wonderful time, okay?